Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about thought patterns and different thought loops, things that we think up here that make life a lot harder. And I'm going to give you a couple of tips, a couple of things to look out for so that when you do start having thoughts like this, you can become aware and take a step back. All right? So there are a number of these that we're going to go through. If you're interested, go to Google and type in cognitive distortions. There's a bunch of them out there, but we're only going to cover a few for this one. The first one I want to talk about is, have you folks heard of these two things? The umbrella term is called jumping to conclusions, okay? In jumping to conclusions, we've got two big branches. One is mind reading, and the second one is predicting the future. So when we jump to conclusions, oftentimes we try to predict things that are going to happen, or we try to, something small happens, and it could be interpreted several different ways, and we just take one way and we run with it. For example, if you ever do mind reading, it might be something like this. You have a conversation with your employer or your professor, and you think you say something stupid. And then you think, oh man, now he thinks that I'm stupid, or he thinks that I'm incapable, or I'm incompetent, or she thinks that I'm not trustworthy. What did you just do? Well, unless you can literally read their mind, which you probably can't, you just engaged in mind reading. So you said something out loud, and then your brain jumped to conclusions on how they interpreted what you just said. Now, there might be some merit to it, right? If you say something and you get a facial reaction, which is not what you were expecting, you can take a step back and go, all right, well, maybe this didn't land the way I thought it would. But you don't really know, do you? But we don't think of it like that. We don't think, oh, that's a thought that I just had. Oh, I'm jumping to conclusions. No. We think, holy smokes, she thinks I'm dumb. Or he thinks I'm arrogant. Or he thinks I'm snobby. Or I'm too frugal. So we jump to conclusions and we read other people's brains. We read their minds. And in those moments, it's important to take a step back and think, I just want to observe my thought without judgment. I said something and this person looked at me a certain way. That's all that happened. I do not know what they're thinking inside their head. And me jumping to a conclusion is not doing me any benefits. To make it as simple as possible, if I immediately jump to a conclusion, is that a helpful thought or an unhelpful thought? All right? So at this stage, we just want to become aware and we want to observe our thoughts non-judgmentally. So we talked about jumping to conclusions in relation to mind reading, but we also have predicting the future. Tomorrow is going to suck because I have to give a presentation and the presentations are going to suck and then my classmates are going to laugh and I'm going to get a bad grade. So you're trying to predict things that haven't happened yet, as if you have this mystical ball that you look into. So what we do is you jump to conclusions without even being there, without even practicing. So both, whether we're reading people's minds or whether we're trying to predict the future. Oh, if I ask her, she's going to say no. Or if I do this, if I go to the gym for the first time and I'm out of shape, people are going to look at me and they're going to smile and they're going to laugh and they're going to make rude comments. You're predicting the future. In other words, you're jumping to conclusions, which is a cognitive distortion. And all that means is what you are thinking may not be a fact. When you think about something, be open-minded and yet be skeptical. And those sound like opposites. But they can both work simultaneously. Now you're thinking, Daniel, how is that possible? How can you both be open-minded and skeptical? Beautiful question. Here's how. You're open-minded in that you observe all of your thoughts that you have in different situations, okay? But you're skeptical in that you don't believe every thought that you have. Just because you think a certain way doesn't mean it's true. Which actually leads us to the second cognitive distortion, the second sort of thought pattern that messes people up. It's emotional reasoning. And this one really trips people up. Ready? Just because you feel a certain way does not mean it's true. Just because you feel a certain way does not mean it's true. If something happens in front of someone you care about or in front of someone you want to impress, and you feel embarrassed afterwards because you said something dumb or something came out wrong or inappropriately, people will sit back and they'll go, well, I feel terrible right now. I feel embarrassed, so it must be real. Folks, we should be skeptical, not just towards our thoughts, but also towards our emotions. Just because you feel upset does not mean that there's something wrong with you. And it's really important to make this distinction. We still accept our emotions. Oh, this is how I'm feeling right now. Okay. And yet we recognize if you go out on a date and it doesn't go well because you guys didn't click, and you start to feel terrible, you don't want to immediately think, I'm terrible at dating, I'm going to stay single forever. Why? Because I felt so sad on this date, it confirmed my belief. So we want to be careful. Not everything that we think is true. Not everything that we feel is true. We want to be skeptical. So we have jumping to conclusions. We have emotional reasoning. A very simple but also common one is known as the all or nothing. I'm sure you've heard of this one before. Maybe you use it in your own lives. You phrase things as if they're either all or nothing. It's either this or nothing. Either I get the promotion or my wife's going to leave me. Either I hit the gym today or I'm never going to work out again. Either this or that, when in actuality, there's a lot more leeway. So the problem happens when we're thinking and we're trying to be so logical, we put our back against the wall. And we say, I really want this to happen. Because if this doesn't happen, then this will happen. So I'm going to try so hard to make this thing happen. And if it doesn't happen, well, now I'm going to feel sad and bummed out and frustrated and annoyed. When sometimes all you need to do is have a conversation with someone and they share with you and they go, look, just because this isn't working out, did you consider options B, C, and D? These are other alternatives, but you were so focused on this one path that you didn't consider them. And the moment you realize it's not an all or nothing approach, guess what? Stress lowers. And performance increases. So does your general mood, health, and well-being. If you've heard of the word overthinking, it's essentially rumination. So it's thinking about something over and over and over again for a long period of time. And generally, it's almost done without any sense of control. Like if you talk to people who ruminate, they'll say, look, I don't want to think about it, but it just happens. I just think about things over and over and over again for minutes and sometimes even for hours on end. And if someone's thinking about something that they don't want to, if someone keeps going over something negative that happened in the past, the trick to that isn't to tell them to suppress their thoughts. You don't say, hey, don't think about that. You don't tell them to think positively. Stuff is probably not going to work. Instead, one, it begins with education. You become aware of flaws in our cognitive processing, meaning when something happens in the world, you're on the bus and an attractive person smiles at you. Reality is subjective. Why? What does that mean in your head? If you feel very insecure about the glasses you just bought, or acne, or a certain bad haircut you got, and she looks at you and smiles, in your head that could mean, holy smokes, she thinks I'm a dork. She's making fun of me in her head. That can mean all the way from that to, holy smokes, this person's interested in me, aren't I attractive? So that's why you can have two people in almost the exact same situation who have completely different takeaways. If both of them thought they had bad haircuts, but the one who attributes that stare to something negative is going to go buy a hat, and his self-esteem and confidence won't be too great afterwards. But the guy who attributed that stare to being attractive, it's going to change the way he feels. All because of how he's interacting with the world. All because of what's going on up here. We have these beliefs that we hold, whether it's jumping to conclusions, whether it's emotional reasoning, whether it's all or nothing approaches. There's a bunch more out there as well. And we have to take a step back and recognize when something's making us upset, or feel frustrated, or feel annoyed. The first step is taking a step back and it's very strange, but you're thinking about thinking. You sit back and you go, okay, what I just had was a thought. All right, it was a thought about what? Okay, it was a thought about myself. I'm critiquing myself. It's self-criticism. Okay, which might be valid. Everybody has flaws, and there could be very sound self-criticism. The problem is, if the voice inside your head is only criticizing yourself, or the self-criticism is so much so that it drowns out any time you do something positive, that's when it becomes a problem. It's no different than having a partner or having an employer who only points out the things that you do wrong. If your supervisor or professor was to come up and say you did this, and this wrong every single day, it's going to take a toll on you. What if you did 5 things wrong and you did 10 things right? But they never pointed out the 10 things. You never said, hey, by the way, you did this really great, and on that, it was a phenomenal idea, and I love your innovative approach to this thing, but they don't say the things that you do well. What does that sound like? That sounds like a relationship that you don't want to be in. That sounds like an employer or a professor who you don't want to interact with. So what happens, good people, when it's you? When that voice is coming from you? If you lose a job or if you lose a relationship, how does your mind make sense of what just happened? And the reason it's so difficult to have conversations like this, it's because when we're in those situations, it's like we're in tunnel vision. It might be easier for other people to see and to recognize the flaw in our thinking, but when it's you, it's extremely tough. Why? Because emotions are riled up. Maybe we get too defensive. Maybe we beat ourselves up. Maybe we're more irritable. So if someone does try to point it out, where we don't receive their feedback in a very polite and respectful manner, maybe we lash out at others. So what do we do about this? The first step is education. The second step is application. The problem with a lot of people, and I fall into this caveat as well, we watch all these videos about psychology, about self-help, about working out, about whatever. But if we don't apply them, we're fooling ourselves by thinking that we've made progress. Watching a video could be progress, absolutely. But at what point do we make it to level 2? How many videos about CBT do you have to listen to? Like, I was thinking about this, right? Before I made this video today, I was sitting there and thinking, how many topics have I covered? How many clips on Instagram do I have? I've easily over 200, 300 videos on YouTube. Easily over 600 or 700 videos on TikTok. What more is there to talk about? What more can I say? About anxiety, about depression, about cognitive biases, about motivation, about goals, about identity. How much more is there to talk about? It's not like I'm inventing new stuff. And yet I find that, especially with some of the people I've interacted with online, they'll say things like, Daniel, this is great. I love when you're talking about this. I just can't implement it. Like, I know what you're saying is right. It makes total sense to me. But I just haven't gone about and done anything about it. Because it's easier to sit down and listen than to actually go ahead and do. And I don't disagree. It is far better. It is far easier. And it takes less effort just to sit there and listen to a couple of YouTube videos so that you go, oh, I'm learning new things, but to never actually act on them. So the way to move forward is next time you go to work, next time you're at school, next time you're talking to a friend, and you realize these thoughts start to come up. Why would she say that? Oh, so-and-so must be mad at me. Wait, That's a thought. So and so must be mad at me. Do I know she's mad at me for a fact? No, I don't. Okay. Okay, interesting. Oh God, I gotta get the scholarship. If I don't get the scholarship, then I'm gonna have to work extra over the summer and life's gonna suck, which means I can't go out with my friends. What did I just do there? If this, I have to get this. If this doesn't happen, then this happens. In other words, I'm doing the all or nothing. And when you can begin to catch yourself, what you'll end up realizing is that a lot of these things that would fluster you over minutes, hours, weeks, if not months, you will end up struggling less because of it. You'll still have those moments, and we'll still have those blind spots and those flaws because we're human. But the more educated we are, and the more aware we become of our thoughts and of our biases, the easier life can become for us. In other words, it's like you have a manual for how to live and for how to think. No one teaches you how to think, really. Nobody in elementary school, middle school, or high school sits down with you and goes, look, there's certain things like cognitive biases and how you interact with the world. I mean, maybe you were lucky and you have a psychology class in high school. So once we become aware, we can begin to implement. And once we can begin to implement, that's when we can start seeing changes in our lives in a positive manner, which will reinforce what we've done. So the way forward, my dear friends, is education. That's why I'm here. That's why you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of experts who are putting their knowledge online for free. I don't even have to drop any names. You know who I'm talking about, right? The neuroscientists, the clinical psychologists, the biologists, the foot doctors, the family doctors. They're out there. The knowledge is out there. It's up to you to listen to them, to take it in, and to apply it to your life, to make your life more healthier. And folks, if we can decrease our suffering by simply putting in effort, why shouldn't we?